Cindy McCain was having an affair.
Well, what we report in the book is that John McCain's advisors thought that. She had been spotted in Phoenix, they had heard, with another man, and they were really worried about it because that would obviously be a big problem.
It was a bad marriage.
I'm sorry?
You also said that it was a bad marriage, that they argued all the time.
Well, the people around them
Are you
saw
getting
them.
anxious to read this book?
The people around them saw them fighting regularly. She did not want him to run for president. She'd had a very bad experience when he ran in 2000, attacks on their daughter, attacks on the family. She didn't want any part of this. From within the party, that's right.
One of the other things in there that was pretty shocking was you wrote about John and Elisabeth Edwards, and you said that she was much different in her private life, that she was very abusive to her husband, but what we saw in the public was she was battling breast cancer. She was dealing with her husband's affair. Like Joy said, don't you get a pass?
Look, Joy is absolutely right that this is an incredibly sympathetic person. She lost a teenage son who died in a tragic accident. Really? She had cancer. She's one of the most iconic and brave cancer survivors we've seen in the country. But in talking to people around the Edwards, including people very sympathetic to Elisabeth, what we found is there's another side of her, a side that the public has never seen until our book, someone who was, even before the crises in her life, pretty abusive. She would refer to John Edwards as a hick. She'd make fun of his parents as being
What woman doesn't make fun of her parents-in-law?
Well, there you go.
I want to ask you, you briefly mentioned Harry Reid before, and what do you think, after his quote is out, it's obviously in the book, what do you think is going to happen? Have you heard anything?
Well, look, it's a pretty big controversy. We're a little surprised it set off this much controversy. I think as long as the president and the other Democrats stand by him, he'll probably stay in this. But it does point out, just even now that we have an African-American president, all of these issues are still so raw and so tough to deal with, and very political as well, very partisan.
So now, have you gotten any heat from this? Is anybody calling up, screaming, coming after you?
You know, John Hama and I have been political reporters for a long time. Part of why we were able to do 300 interviews and get a lot of cooperation is we know all these people, and we've known them for years. So far, I'm happy to say a few people have issued what we call in the business non-denial denials about the book, but I've gotten no angry emails so far.
But will you be able to write another one? That's the question.
To you now.
Mark, I want to talk about another person you write about, and you do it here, and that is Sarah Palin, who has emerged, whatever people have said about her, and you talk about the fact that the McCain people hadn't a clue. They never talked about her foreign policy when they were interviewing her. They were appalled by her behavior. You think this is going to bother anybody now?
You asked me at the top the biggest surprises, and for us on Palin was a huge surprise, 2 levels. One is John McCain picked her barely knowing her. He'd met her a few times. He barely knew her. The amount of time they spent scrutinizing her background, we say in the book, was less than would get the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture. They didn't send anyone to Alaska to look in her background, and then they picked her. And then they found, to their surprise, she knew less about the world than they thought, and she had almost what some people thought was an emotional breakdown after that interview she did with Katie Couric. She was extraordinarily fragile, and they were really stunned. And right before the debate, they thought they could have a crisis. I'm sorry?
Terrified that something could happen and she could be president. But is this going to damage her now?
Well, we'll see. You know, Sarah Palin, like George Bush, Bill Clinton, is an incredibly polarizing figure. All the people who bought her book, I think will say, you know what, this stuff doesn't distract from how much we like her. But I think there are a lot of people who are going to see a side of her they've never seen, because you think about it, most of us never have met Sarah Palin. I've met her a couple times, but she's from Alaska. You've met her, of course, Barbara, but most Americans don't have that privilege. These people we talked to for the book are some of the few people in national life who have been able to observe her up close and behind the scenes to see what she's really like, and we're able to tell that story in the book.
I actually found her to be a very nice person,
and
it seemed like she had it together and not broken down either.